Hey guys, tonight we slip into fur-lined boots, still damp from yesterday's storm. Step outside a timbered hut, perched near the edge of the world, and instantly regret it. Wind claws at your cheeks like an angry spirit. Ice crunches beneath your feet, and your breath steams out in ragged little puffs. The fjord behind you glows faintly under moonlight. Black water and silver reflections swaying like an old lover's goodbye. But even in this numbing cold, there's something smoldering behind your ribs, something stubborn and almost romantic. You're already composing lines in your head, rhymed couplets about frostbite and longing. You don't know it yet, but one of these verses is going to survive the next 1,000 years. Whether that makes you a poetic genius or just a very bored, very cold Viking is still up for debate. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and what time you're watching. Let's see who else is wandering the poetic wastelands of Viking love stories. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a skald in training, half bard, half gossip, full-time dramatic. Your fingers are numb, but your mind's a forge. Words come easier than warmth out here. The hut's walls groan from snow piled on the roof. And every time the wind howls, it feels personal. Still, instead of fixing the drafty window, you reach for your walrus tooth stylus. You carve a new line into a birch bark strip. It's about her eyes. Obviously, they always are. They were green like sea glass, or maybe just slightly better than average. Doesn't matter. You compare them to emerald fire trapped in ice, which makes zero geological sense, but would have absolutely destroyed at the mead hall last week. Because here's the thing. Vikings weren't just berserkers with hygiene problems and axes the size of toddlers. They were also absurdly into poetry, like aggressively. Poetry wasn't just entertainment, it was currency, status, seduction. Some kings would rather lose a goat than be roasted in verse. A good skald could earn a place at court, get free food, maybe even avoid being murdered in their sleep. A bad one. Let's just say it's hard to rhyme with decapitated. And love poems. Those were risky. Viking society thrived on honor, power, and reputation. Publicly expressing affection was like handing someone your heart on a spear. If the object of your affection was already married, likely, related to someone important, very likely, or just not that, into you, always possible. You were gambling with your social life, and possibly your actual life. Historians still argue whether composing love poetry for a taken woman was considered actual adultery or just deeply inconvenient. But either way, people got exiled over less. You glance at your half-finished stanza. It needs something, a metaphor. You're partial to Kenning's those quirky compound phrases that make everything sound more mythical than it is. Her smile could be a storm light, her laugh a seal song. You briefly consider comparing her to a warm sausage, because it's been 3 weeks since you had a proper meal. But you resist. Even Vikings had standards. Barely. Your neighbor stomps in from the snow, shakes off like a wet bear, and eyes your writing with suspicion. Still on about her, he grunts, pulling an icicle from his beard. You nod, because words are sacred, and also because your jaw is mostly frozen. He snorts and mutters something about wasting bark on lost causes. You ignore him. Inspiration is rare. Bark is rarer. But when you're onto something, when a line actually lands right in the chest like a thrown spear made of syllables, you don't stop. You pace the room. The floor creaks like it's judging you. Your breath comes in visible bursts. each one slightly poetic if you squint. And you remember last spring, at the Thing, the big yearly assembly where laws were made, feuds aired, and flirty glances exchanged. You saw her, braids tight, cloak trimmed with seal fur, voice like melted snow on stone. She recited a line from Hávamál under her breath, and you just imploded a little. Naturally, you followed that moment by spilling mead down your tunic and forgetting your own name. Classic. But you recovered. And that night, when she laughed at your joke about Odin's terrible taste in ravens, something sparked. Later, someone sang. Not well. You think it was about goats. The memory's blurry, smeared by firelight and too much drink. But it was warm, and her eyes crinkled when she smiled. And that was enough. You've been trying to immortalize that crinkle ever since, outside. Wolves howl, or maybe it's just Bjorn's kids playing again. You never really know with them. Still, you huddle by the fire, warming your ink-stained fingers, and keep writing, because even though you've got chores to do, snow to shovel, and a debt collector probably en route with a very pointy stick, the poem matters. If it's good enough, she might hear it. If it's great, she might remember you when she's married off to a fur trader from Gotland. And if it's legendary, who knows? Maybe someone will recite it in a university lecture hall 1,000 years from now and call you culturally significant. One thing's for sure, no one in this world or the next is writing poetry for fun. It's always survival, either of the heart, the ego, or you're standing in the clan. Even your enemies might spare you if your verse makes them laugh before it insults their lineage. Maybe. It's a long shot. But in a world where the sea freezes, the goats bite, and your roof leaks more than your cousin's gossiping mouth, poetry is what keeps things soft. You draft another stanza. This one's bold. A little too honest. You read it back and wince. Too late now. The bark's been scored. That line's immortal, for better or worse. You hope she likes it. You hope she gets to read it. You hope it makes her laugh in that way that made your ribs feel less hollow last spring. And if not, well, there's always next season's poetry duel, or Exile. One of those two. Steam curls around your ears, thick as soup and hotter than it has any right to be this far north. Your skin prickles and your muscles begin to melt, but you don't dare let your eyelids drop, not in a Viking sauna. Not when half the village is squeezed into a sweat-drenched log cabin, and the other half is eavesdropping through the cracks in the walls. You sit on a moss-padded bench, your bare shoulders slick with perspiration, while a toothless elder ladles water onto red-hot stones with the solemnity of a priest offering last rites. The resulting hiss is aggressive, like the ghosts of all your bad poems screaming in protest. The air thickens. You're not sure if you're about to reach enlightenment or pass out. Then she speaks. You know her voice before your ears catch the words, a low, wry murmur that cuts through the steam like a dagger through butter. She's recounting a saga. Not just any saga, but that saga. The one where a jealous husband tricks his rival into hunting a troll wife and ends up turned into a walrus for eternity. It's a cautionary tale, obviously, but she's doing it for the drama, and you're here for it. The whole room leans in, because in the Viking world, a good story is currency, a flex, and occasionally a love letter, all at once. You find yourself laughing, too loud, trying to signal that you not only get the joke, but would happily write 3 stanzas about it. Later, someone brings out dried cod strips. They squeak when you chew them. You pretend they're delicious. She leans over and says something about the poetic form of drotkvet, and you nearly choke on your snack. Most people avoid drotkvet unless they've made peace with suffering. It's a beast of a structure, 8-line stanzas, fixed syllable counts, internal rhyme, alliteration, the works. It's less free verse and more mental gymnastics with a side of existential dread. But she likes it, thrives in it, and that alone makes your heart flip like a capsizing longship. You nod enthusiastically, trying to look like a man who definitely understands meter. She offers you a challenge, compose a stanza on the spot. The room pauses, like a collective inhale. Someone stops pouring water on the stones. You cough, then begin. Your verse stumbles at first, too many syllables, a mismatched kenning, a metaphor about a goat that lands awkwardly, but you recover. Line 3 hits like a punchline, and line 6 has actual internal rhyme. When you finish, she gives a soft, amused nod, the kind that says, "Not bad." Peasant. And your chest swells with ridiculous pride. You're not winning any Saga scrolls with that one, but you didn't publicly embarrass yourself either. In Viking terms, that's foreplay. It turns out these steamy sweat lodges weren't just for cleanliness. They were one of the few places people could talk privately. Steam shrouds secrets. Lovers plotted elopements here. Scalds whispered stanzas. Enemies muttered truces while wrapped in birch branches. The bathhouse was both neutral ground and emotional furnace. Historians still argue whether these saunas were gender mixed in every region, or if Icelanders were just especially liberal with their steam etiquette. But one thing's clear: important things happened here. And sometimes, under the right conditions, people fell in love, or at least exchanged verses intense enough to require a cool-down dip in a glacial stream afterward. You stay in the heat until your limbs turn to soup, and your thoughts begin rhyming without permission. Then the door creaks open, letting in a gust of frozen air and moonlight. She's already outside, wrapped in a rough-spun cloak, her hair damp and sticking to her cheek. She turns and raises an eyebrow, an unspoken dare, and you stumble out after her like a newborn reindeer. The cold punches you in the face. You gasp. She laughs, and you decide that sound is going in your next stanza. You walk together down a snow-covered path, your footprints quickly erased behind you by drifting flurries. The village sleeps, except for the goats, who are always plotting something. She tells you about her father's verse duel at the last Althing, how he insulted a chieftain so cleverly they didn't even realize it until 3 days later. You're impressed, but not surprised. Poetry, in this world, is weaponized charm. And tonight, you're both armed. She pauses, eyes the sky. "Make a kenning for the moon," she says, testing you. You look up, squinting. Sky pearl. You offer. Too soft. She smirks. Frozen eye of the wolf god. You blink. That's actually good. Very good. You file it away for later. You reach her hut. She steps inside, turns briefly, and says nothing, but the silence feels thick with ellipses. You walk back alone, the night swallowing your footprints again. At home, you peel off your damp tunic, curl under a hide blanket, and whisper the moon kenning to yourself like a secret prayer. Tomorrow, you'll carve it into bark, maybe bury it near her doorway, or better yet, slip it to her brother, who owes you for not outing his embarrassing Saga attempt last month. The Steamhouse Saga stays with you, lingering like heat under your skin. It's not just about poems, or flirtation, or who came up with the best metaphor for snowblindness. It's about presence, about choosing words instead of weapons. And in this world, where the axe is quick, but the verse endures, that choice matters. Later, much later, when you're older and your joints ache with every change in weather, someone will ask how you met her. You'll smile, lean back in your creaking chair, and say, "She challenged me to rhyme in a sauna," and the room will laugh, and someone will mutter about how that sounds like a bad start to a saga. But you'll remember that steam, that hush, that pause before the verse, and you'll know it was the beginning of something worth remembering. Just like the stanza you'll never admit you wrote about her smile, the one still tucked under your bed, the one that still makes you blush. You're not exactly in a good mood. Your boots are caked in frozen mud. Your shoulder aches from splitting too much firewood, and the village idiot just mistook your best verse for a fishing recipe. Again. But even with the persistent throb in your temple and the general sense that the gods are laughing at you today, you can't stop thinking about the line you just wrote. It's short, deceptively simple, and will probably get you stabbed. The thing is, you've named names. Not just any name, her name. You let it slip in the fourth line, thinking it was subtle. It wasn't. Now the entire verse hums with tension. A kind of poetic landmine wrapped in pretty syllables. You sit by the hearth, firelight flickering against the walls like restless spirits, and read it back one more time. It's a masterpiece, or a suicide note. Possibly both. Here's the problem: she's married. Not happily, not romantically, and not particularly legally, depending on which elder you ask, but officially, undeniably, married. To a man with shoulders like oxen and the conversational charm of an icicle. He's not known for his literary taste, unless you count throwing people into snowdrifts as critique. And you've written a love poem that mentions her laugh, the mole on her collarbone, and the exact way she says your name when she's annoyed. Historians still argue whether such poems were considered flirtation, slander, or a high form of emotional terrorism. In any case, the consequences were creative. You could be challenged to a verse duel, which sounds glamorous until you realize it's basically a rap battle where the loser sometimes ends up banished or dead. Or worse, you might be invited to dinner, poisoned with fish soup, and found the next morning with a suspiciously poetic farewell note. But you can't help yourself. That's the curse of being a skald. Everything becomes a line, every glance a stanza, every heartbreak a bloody masterpiece. You remember the last feud that started over poetry, two cousins fighting over a widow's affections? One wrote a scathing verse comparing the other's beard to moldy hay. The insult stuck. The beard did not. You heard he shaved it off and joined a monastery out of shame. This is your inheritance, not land, not gold, but the power to weaponize words like iron blades. Of course, there are rules. Sort of. You're technically allowed to write about anyone, as long as you don't claim anything too suggestive, and you couch it all in enough metaphor to confuse your audience just long enough to avoid a duel. That's where the kennings come in handy. Instead of saying her lips are soft, you say they're ember threads of dawn. Instead of her eyes, storm jewels in the whale road's gloom. It's dense. It's ridiculous. It's plausible deniability wrapped in velvet syllables. You learned from the best. Your uncle once got out of a 3-month feud by explaining that his infamous loins kenning was actually about a sheep. No one believed him. But he said it so eloquently, the council let it slide. You miss that idiot. He had terrible judgment but a perfect grasp of alliteration. Tonight, you're supposed to be helping prepare for the winter feast. Instead, you're sketching out a poem on a flattened piece of bark you stole from the woodpile. You know it's foolish. You know the risks. But the way she looked at you during the last moot, when the elders were arguing about goat taxes, and she rolled her eyes so subtly you almost missed it, that moment deserves to be remembered, immortalized, even. And if you die for it, well, at least you'll go down as a hopeless romantic with decent meter. You sigh and read the stanza again, checking the rhythm. Your fingers trace the scratches instinctively. It's tight, precise. Maybe your best work yet. Which is exactly why it's also your most dangerous. You could hide it, burn it, claim it was about someone else easy enough. Names are fluid here, and half the village shares 2 grandfathers. But you won't. Not yet. Not when it's still warm, still alive. You hear footsteps outside. Heavy. Familiar. You freeze. It's him. Her husband. Great. You tuck the bark into your tunic just as the door swings open and he ducks inside, bringing with him the smell of wet fur and bruised ego. His eyes narrow when he sees you. Heard you wrote something, he says. Voice flat. You shrug like someone who has absolutely not been writing about another man's wife for the past hour. People say things. You reply, keeping your tone casual. He steps closer. You can feel the floorboards creak under his boots. They say it rhymed with her name. You pause, then smile just a little. So does flame. And shame. Could have been either. He glares at you, nostrils flaring like a war horse that's just heard a limerick it didn't like. You brace for the punch, but instead he grunts and leaves. No threats, no challenge, just a door left slightly ajar and a wave of nausea in your gut. That was close, too close. You sit back down, exhale shakily, and press the bark against your chest like a shield. Later that night, you sneak out to the cliff's edge overlooking the fjord. The sky is a bruised tapestry of stars, and the wind cuts like gossip. You unfold the bark, whisper the lines to the void, and then very gently release it into the dark. The bark flutters, stumbles, then disappears into the snow below. It's not gone forever. Nothing ever is. One day, some poor soul might find it, piece it together, and wonder who you were and why you risked so much for someone else's wife. Or maybe they'll just use it to start a fire. Either way, it's out there now, one more secret in the snow. One more verse in the blood-stained library of Viking love. It starts with a fishbone. Not the sharp, mouth-stabbing kind that ruins stew, but a smooth, sanded-down sliver used as a quill. You're hunched over a makeshift desk, really just a flipped-over barrel, covered in wax-stained cloth, trying to get the angle right. Your ink is a questionable mixture of pine soot, oil, and what may or may not be rabbit's blood. The light from the tallow candle flickers with every gust of wind seeping through the wooden walls. And your parchment sealskin, not because it's fancy, but because it's the only thing in this godforsaken climate that won't disintegrate the moment your tears of poetic frustration hit it. This is how you write a love letter in the north with scraps, guts, and a steady hand. Well, as steady as possible after 3 hours of trying to make fjord rhyme with adored. You glance down at your work in progress. It's less a letter and more a riddle in iambic confusion. But you're getting there. You've captured her walk, described it as the rhythm of wind across ice. You've described her voice as the hidden chord between raven cry and lullaby. A little dramatic, maybe. But drama is the only way to survive Viking adolescence. She might read it. She might even keep it. Or, most likely, it'll end up used to stuff a leaky boot. You don't even know if you'll be able to get it to her. She lives across the village, past the gossiping old men who sit outside like stone gargoyles, past the goat pen with the one and only young animal that really seems to have it out for you, and right beside the family whose job it is to keep track of disputes, which means they know your name very, very well. So the plan is this: give it to her younger brother, the one who still thinks you're cool because you once pretended to fight a bear. It was a shadow. But he doesn't need to know that. And tell him it's a game, not a letter. Definitely not a confession. Just something silly, something harmless, something that won't lead to you getting disemboweled with a soup ladle. You finish the last line with a flourish, accidentally smudging the third stanza in the process. Doesn't matter. Maybe it looks more heartfelt this way. You roll the sealskin carefully, tying it with a thin strip of sinew, and tuck it inside a hollowed-out chunk of driftwood you've been saving. It looks like firewood. That's the idea. You carry it casually through the snow, rehearsing your casual smile, your casual nod, your casual lie. The brother isn't home. Of course he isn't. Instead, she answers, hair undone, hands dusted with flour, an amused look that cuts through your casual like a hot knife through seal fat. You freeze. The driftwood is in your hand. You could still pretend it's a gift. Firewood. That's normal, right? Vikings love firewood. You're here, she says, smiling faintly. With wood. Symbolic, you blurt out, then immediately wish to be struck down by Thor. She laughs. It's not cruel, just amused. You consider running. Instead, you hand it over. Just something I carved. You say, bit of writing inside. Boring stuff. She takes it gently, the way one handles something alive. I'll read it later. She says. You nod. Say something about hunting or weather, honestly. You black out from anxiety and walk away as fast as dignity allows. That night, you lie awake, chewing over every syllable you wrote. You picture her unrolling the sealskin, eyes scanning your messy scrawl, lips forming the lines in silence. Maybe she smiles. Maybe she shows it to her mother, and they both laugh. Maybe it ends up lining the bottom of a grain sack. Historians still argue whether love letters were commonly exchanged in Viking society, or if that was more of a bardic fantasy. There's limited evidence preserved bits of poetic verse carved into items, odd metaphors woven into oral sagas, fragments suggesting someone risked everything for just one private word. But what survives is enough to say, this people tried. Even when writing meant hours of labor, even when delivery required stealth, bribery, or sheer dumb luck, even when words were the one luxury poorer Vikings couldn't afford to waste. Because to write is to believe that someone will read it, that someone will understand, that even if your life is short, brutal, and likely to end via axe or frostbite, the line you penned might outlive you, or at least earn you a kiss. The next morning, she doesn't mention the letter. Not at the well. Not during the moot. Not even when you both end up accidentally paired in a log-hauling chore, and she spends most of it mocking your grip strength. But there's a glint in her eye. A pause when you stutter. A silence that stretches just long enough to feel deliberate. That night, someone leaves something outside your door. It's wrapped in old linen, smells faintly of rosemary, and weighs very little. Inside is a sealskin strip, inked onto it, in cleaner handwriting than you'll ever manage, is a single line. Even driftwood finds its tide. You read it 17 times before tucking it under your pillow. Then you stay up, planning your next stanza. This is how it begins, not with declarations, not with swooning, but with secret exchanges wrapped in driftwood, with poems that barely survive the weather, with words that hang in the space between you like frost-laced breath, waiting to be warmed by fire or fate. You don't know what will happen next, whether this becomes saga material or ends in awkward avoidance at next month's feast. But tonight, you write, because someone read, and that's enough. You spot her across the mead hall long before she notices you. Or maybe she does notice, and she's just pretending not to. Hard to say with someone whose resting face could make a chieftain second-guess his battle plan. The hall is loud, thick with the smell of sweat, roast lamb, spilled ale, and the faintest trace of wet dog. Typical feast night. Benches creak under fur-clad warriors. Someone's already singing off-key, and the scald by the hearth is butchering a perfectly decent tale about a troll and a midwife. You hover awkwardly near the mead barrels, clutching your cup like a shield, watching as she exchanges some quiet joke with a cousin or maybe a potential suitor. Because in this light, all the men start to look the same: broad, loud, beardy. You've memorized every step of your approach plan, rehearsed it in your head while hauling firewood and pretending you weren't sweating out of sheer anxiety. You even chose your tunic carefully, the one without ink stains and only a few suspicious holes. This was supposed to be the night you unveiled your next poem. Not publicly, that would be suicidal, but casually. Artfully slipped into conversation like a sharpened blade hidden in a loaf of bread. Unfortunately, your feet refuse to move. Then she catches your eye. Not for long. Just a flicker. A look that says, well, you coming? Or are you just going to die in that corner? So you cross the hall, navigating between drunken shoulders, half-eaten platters, and the slippery remains of someone's eel stew. When you reach her, she gestures to the bench beside her without a word. You sit. Try not to look like you're vibrating with nervous energy. She takes a sip from her cup, then asks, still writing. You nod. Then you realize she's waiting. For proof. You panic a little. You hadn't planned to recite the new verse, yet it's still in your head. Incomplete. Wobbly. Maybe even terrible. But the silence stretches. So you begin. Just the first 4 lines. Your voice low, lost under the hum of feast noise. Her hand pauses midway to her mouth. She listens. Actually listens. You stumble on the 6th line. Confuse your kenning for hope with one that accidentally implies constipation, but recover by the 8th. When you finish, there's a pause. She nods once, then says, better. You don't even try to hide your grin. Somewhere behind you, someone yells, and a drinking horn crashes to the floor. No one notices you. The universe continues spinning, full of spilled mead and noisy boasts. But in your chest, something has clicked. She doesn't just tolerate your poetry. She expects it. She critiques it. And that's the most terrifying and thrilling thing you've felt since you got caught stealing eggs last summer. Later, she proposes a duel. Not the sword kind, the verse kind. A flirt-off in poetic form. You laugh at first, then realize she's dead serious. Right here you ask, voice cracking slightly. Now he shrugs. You scared? Of course you're scared. This is the kind of public display that can make or break a skald's reputation. But something in her expression dares you to rise. So you do. You clear your throat, raise your cup, and start. A clever quip. A safe opener. You compare her laugh to the first crack of lake ice in spring. Not bad. She counters, without hesitation, calls your eyes storm pools, where pride goes to drown. The hall isn't paying attention, but you feel every word like a spark dancing across your skin. You volley. She returns. Back and forth. Her verses are sharp. Clean. Just flirtatious enough to keep people guessing, but layered with genuine bite. Yours are messier, rawer, but land with occasional brilliance. It's a private war in public space, a battle of metaphors and glances, and you live for it. Eventually, you both fall silent. You're grinning like an idiot, flushed from more than just the mead. She leans closer, voice low. You're not bad at this. You inspire me. You whisper, and immediately regret how sappy that sounds. She doesn't flinch, just raises one eyebrow, clearly filing that line under points for effort. You both return to your cups. No declarations, no dramatic exits. But something's shifted. That night, you walk home humming. The verses replay themselves in your head, rearranging, evolving. You start writing new ones the moment your boots hit your doorway. You're already carving the next set of lines before the fire's even lit. Historians still debate whether public flirtation through poetry was widespread or reserved for the elite and dangerously bored. But anecdotal Saga fragments suggest it was a known practice, especially in communities where actual courtship was about as romantic as a tax audit. The verse duel allowed subtext. It allowed plausible deniability. And, occasionally, it allowed two people to speak truths they couldn't say outright. You realize, a week later, that her cousin has started quoting one of your lines badly, which means someone was eavesdropping, which means the duel is now public knowledge. You should be nervous. You probably are. But mostly, you feel a strange warmth. You've traded blows with the one person who challenges your words and sharpens your wit, and neither of you flinched. That counts for something. At the next feast, you're ready. You bring 2 verses tucked in your belt, a third half-formed behind your teeth. You don't know if you'll need them, but you carry them anyway. Like weapons, like gifts, like shields against whatever comes next. The ocean spray slaps your face harder than any insult you've ever received, and you've received some doozies. Remember that time someone called your ode to mead fermented donkey? Drool in iambic despair, good times. But now you're aboard a longboat, and your heart isn't in your sea legs. It's somewhere back on land, with the person you left behind. The sails groan overhead. The oars churn like clockwork, and every splash of icy seawater reminds you just how far you are from her eyes. Her voice, her perfectly timed mockery of your bad metaphors. Viking raids sound glamorous when sung over mead, but from here, it's mostly wet socks and existential longing. You were barely given time to pack your things before being hauled onto this expedition. A last-minute replacement for a cousin who mysteriously hurt his back during goat shearing. Now you're stuck for weeks, maybe months, depending on whether the gods favor plunder or storms. And while the other men swap bawdy stories and sharpen their blades, you're hunched over a salted barrel, composing love poetry to the rhythm of seasick hiccups. You're not a warrior. You've never claimed to be. Sure, you can hold a blade without immediately slicing yourself, But your real weapon is still metaphor, your real armor, syntax. And yet, here you are, pretending you're fine while your stomach performs acrobatics. You sneak in a stanza between dry heaves. Her absence gnaws as gulls cry, each wave a sigh, each mast a spine aching for her son. Not your best, but you're seasick and sleep-deprived. Cut yourself some slack. Your fellow crewmates laugh when they see you scribbling. One jokingly asks if you're writing a love letter to a cod. You smile, because these are men who solve feelings with fists, and your poetry is safer misunderstood. Still, that night, one of them asks you to write something for his wife. Quietly. A line. A blessing. Something simple to send home with a gift, just in case he doesn't return. So you do. You write her name in neat strokes, then craft a stanza that doesn't try too hard. Just warmth. Just hope. He nods, touches the bark like it's something sacred. It strikes you. Then, how love endures even out here. Not loudly, not with flowers and sonnets, but with tucked-away notes, with stolen moments, with scalds hunched over barrels while the ocean churns. Historians still argue whether Vikings brought love poems on raids, or if modern interpretations just can't resist romanticizing everything. But sagas hint at them fragments of verse in the margins of war, lines carved into keepsakes, rhythms that echo long after the shields stop clashing. You keep writing, even when the waves turn violent and the sky bruises over, even when the men around you lose count of the days. One night, during a calm, you spot a seal. It watches you with eerie calm, bobbing in the water like it's judging your meter. You whisper a kenning for her swan song of hearthfire and pretend the seal approves. Weeks pass. You raid. You burn. You return with spoils. Nothing legendary, just enough to earn you a cut of the silver and a scar on your forearm, where some angry farmer didn't appreciate your lyrical take on his vegetable garden. You don't talk about her, not out loud, but her name stays under your tongue like salt. You say it in your sleep. You etch it into driftwood. You even test out a love song during rowing breaks, claiming it's just a rhythm exercise, though the others start humming it anyway. When you finally return, the village is smaller, somehow, familiar and strange. You step off the boat half expecting her to be there, but she's not. Of course not. She doesn't wait at docks. She waits in poems, in silence, in the spaces between casual glances. You make your way through the mud, your pack heavier than it looks, your thoughts spinning with everything unsaid. You find her near the smokehouse, laughing at something someone else said. It stings a little. Then she sees you. A flicker. A pause. She doesn't rush over, doesn't swoon, just walks up and says, "Back already." You shrug. Turns out, most villages don't appreciate unannounced guests with axes. Shocking. She deadpans. Then, quietly, "Did you write?" You nod, and hand her a folded strip of sealskin, still faintly smelling of brine and regret. She tucks it away without reading. Not yet. She never reads them in front of you. That's her rule. She wants to feel the words privately, wants them without your eyes watching, without the risk of your expression interrupting hers. You respect that. Later, you find a new verse nailed to the back of your door. It's not signed, but you know. The handwriting is too clean, too precise. The line reads, "Oars return, hearts drift, but some carry wind." It's the closest thing to a welcome you could hope for. You reread it until the ink blurs, Then start planning your reply. This is what you have. Not grand reunions or dramatic confessions. Just verses, messages, a call and response across time, distance, and too many fish dinners. The sea may pull you away again. Duty, raids, or exile. But the poems remain. Salted, stained, surviving, like love, like you. Snow creaks beneath your boots like it's trying to warn you. Every step toward the hall feels heavier than it should. And it's not because of the cold. You know what's waiting inside a crowd, a fire, and someone who's just figured out what your last poem really meant. You probably could have been more subtle. The kenning swan breast beneath the moon veil was a bit much, too specific, too her. And now someone's gone and repeated it to their cousin, who repeated it to their aunt, who recited it badly at the fish drying racks in front of half the village. Gossip spreads here faster than fire on dry moss. You enter the hall. Immediately, you feel the shift in air, the silence that trails you like smoke. Conversations pause just long enough for you to register their eyes, their smirks, their too interested faces. You want to melt into the floor, or possibly the nearest snowbank, but you walk forward, back straight, like someone whose heart isn't trying to escape through their ribs. She's not here yet. Thank the gods. But her brother is. The older one. The one with shoulders like a ruined wall and a sense of humor made entirely of threats. He walks up to you slowly, smiling, not warmly. Poet, he says. Just that. You swallow. Yes, you're popular today. He claps a hand on your shoulder. It weighs as much as a small boulder. People like a good love story, especially when it ends in blood. Then he winks and walks off. You're not sure if it was a joke. Historians still argue whether poetic flirtation was protected speech or just legally sanctioned suicide by metaphor. In this case, you're not keen to find out. She arrives mid-feast, hair braided, cloak dusted with snow, expression unreadable. She scans the hall, meets your eyes briefly, then sits at the far end. That's new. That's not good. You sip your mead and try not to stare. But then you see it. Her lips move. She's speaking quietly to the woman beside her, laughing softly. The kind of laugh that makes you wish you could rewind time and re-edit the entire stanza. You don't even notice the skald stepping up to recite until the hall quiets. His voice booms. A new poem tonight, fresh as frostbite. Unknown author, though I suspect we all know the face. Your soul leaves your body before the first line's finished. It's your poem. The whole hall listens. Some smirk, some whisper. One or two visibly swoon. Your words, butchered slightly, now public property. You don't move. You don't breathe. And when it ends, the room erupts not in outrage, but applause, laughter, teasing. Someone slaps your back hard enough to jolt your spine. You smile through it all, stiff as a frozen cod. Then you leave, quietly. No one stops you. Outside, the wind slaps your face again. But at least it's honest. You walk along the edge of the village, trying not to feel like your ribs are full of splinters. You didn't want this. Not like this. The poem was meant for her, not them. Not a skald drunk on attention. You sit by the river. It's half frozen, dark and slow. You toss a pebble in, watch the ripples vanish into slush, and then footsteps. She doesn't speak, just sits beside you, close but not touching. You wait. I didn't give it to him, she says finally. I know, but I showed it to my cousin. She asked. So did the rest of the village. Apparently. She doesn't laugh, just looks out over the river, lips pressed tight. It was good. You shrug. Doesn't matter now. It does, she says, because people heard it, and they heard it right. You turn, surprised. You're not angry. I'm furious. That stings. But she continues. I'm furious because you used a kenning that only I would get, and then you left it where someone else could read it. You're lucky I like the way your metaphors twist themselves into knots. That might be the most flattering insult you've ever received. So what now, you ask? She smiles. Finally. Now you write another one. And this time, make it harder to decode. A private joke. A riddle. You nod, already forming the first line in your head. The poem that follows is a labyrinth, a tangled maze of allusions, twisted kennings, and references only the two of you understand. You slip it to her 3 nights later, folded into a hollow log left near the well. She responds with one line carved into the bark of a tree you both walk past daily. It's not obvious, but it's there, and it's brilliant. This becomes the game. Hidden verses, whispered phrases, one poem sewn into the hem of her cloak, one tucked into a loaf of bread you trade at market. Historians might never find these. They're not preserved in Saga or archive, but they were real, private, perfectly shaped, and utterly unnecessary, which, in a way, makes them even more vital. Love doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes, it just hides in plain sight behind a metaphor, under a rune, inside a joke no one else will ever get. And in a world of axed fights and snowstorms, that's more than survival. That's rebellion. It's amazing how quickly you can go from admired poet to exiled nuisance, all because of one stupid couplet and an audience with no sense of humor. The day starts like any other. Snow in your boots, fish for breakfast, and a faint whiff of goat lingering on everything. You're helping gather kindling when someone grabs you by the shoulder, not gently, and hauls you toward the law rock. At first, you assume it's another poetic challenge, maybe a skirmish over meter or a misplaced kenning. But no, you're accused of Nid the Viking equivalent of defamation via verse. Apparently, your latest love poem was interpreted as a direct insult to the Earl's daughters. All 3 of them. You hadn't even named them. You just used frost-hearted maidens who chill the mead with their gaze. Which, okay, might have been a little pointed, but still metaphorical. Except now, you're standing in the middle of the village, your words being read aloud like they're a death sentence, which they might be. People have lost limbs for less. The Earl himself doesn't attend. Of course, too busy, too regal, or too scared of catching peasant, but he sends his brother, who wears a tunic that looks like it cost more than your entire family's livestock. He reads the poem again, slowly, like he's savoring each syllable. Then he looks at you, eyebrows raised so high they might join the gods. Care to explain this line, he asks, tapping the verse with one well-manicured finger. It's about emotional distance, you say. Metaphorical glaciation. Literary weather. He's not amused. The council debates. Some argue it's just poetry. Some that you've defamed not 1, but 3 noble women. And one very old man insists this is why writing should have been banned centuries ago. You're given the verdict by mid-afternoon, 3 seasons of exile. Not execution. Not mutilation. Just a soft, slow banishment. Enough time to starve or disappear. They say it gently, Like they're offering a vacation you didn't ask for. So now you're walking, leaving. The village recedes behind you as you trudge through knee-deep snow. Pack slung over your shoulder, heart thudding with a mix of fury and poetic resentment. She doesn't come to see you off. You didn't expect her to. Her family's connected to the Earl somehow. Or maybe they're just trying to stay on the right side of scandal. But she leaves something in your satchel. You find it that night, huddled in a cave you're pretending is cozy. A tiny scroll of bark, one line only. The path is long, but so is memory. You reread it over and over, letting the fire warm your hands as your feet thaw from near frostbite. You don't cry. Not really. Just leak a little around the edges. You travel. Not far. At first, just enough to avoid patrols and gossips. You settle near a riverbank and trade verses for food. A family lets you sleep in their goat shed in exchange for bedtime sagas. The goats are judgmental, but warm. One night, you recite a poem that ends in a pun. The farmer laughs so hard he nearly chokes on his porridge and gives you a second blanket. Word spreads. Soon, people come from neighboring huts to hear the exiled poet speak. Not many, just enough to keep you fed and your ego inflated. One of them asks if you're the one who insulted the Earl's daughters. You shrug and say, "I just told the truth." In metaphor. She giggles. And just like that, you feel slightly less frozen. You begin composing again. Not angry screeds or revenge verses, but odd little love fragments. Some about her, some about longing, some about the weird way the sky glows at midnight. You carve them into wood, press them into leather, whisper them to the river. One morning, you wake to find a carved shell left beside your fire. Inside. A line even frost returns to the sun's pull. Her handwriting. You nearly drop it. Who you search for clues. Find only footprints vanishing into snow. No name. No messenger, but the shell sits warm in your palm. You write back. Tuck your reply into a hollow reed and plant it in the riverbank, trusting fate or luck or goats to deliver it. A week later, a bird, an actual raven, if you can believe it, drops a strip of bark onto your head. It reads, "Missed a rhyme. Try again." You burst out laughing so hard, the goats stampede. This is exile. Number. This is correspondence. Guerrilla poetry. You begin sending verses disguised as spells, as charms, as riddles. She replies in even stranger formats. Once, she sews a poem into a tunic you find hanging from a tree. Once, she writes in berry juice on a stone, so faint you nearly miss it. And in this ridiculous makeshift wilderness courtship, you find yourself alive. You're still banned. Technically, still a scandal. But your verses travel. People trade them, quote them, mangle them, and turn them into songs. One line ends up painted on a tavern wall 3 villages away. Love carved in exile bleeds louder than war. You never wrote that, but you like it. Historians still argue whether Viking skalds actually maintained secret poem exchanges during banishment, or if this is all modern fantasy projected backward. But enough saga lines suggest it happened. Enough artifacts hint at exiled verses, smuggled metaphors, love lines sent like arrows across frozen land. You count the days. 63, then 89. Then 110. The winter begins to lift. Your sentence almost over. You don't know if you'll be welcomed back. You don't know if she'll still want to play this ridiculous poetic ping-pong when you return. but you'll go anyway. Not just because you're tired of goat breath, because something real lives in those lines. Something worth walking home for. The wind howls like it's narrating your failures, and you're stuck in a hunting hut the size of a coffin, with the one person you most hoped to avoid for the rest of your natural life. She's sitting across from you on a rough wooden bench, her breath curling in soft clouds, eyes locked on the fire, refusing to acknowledge your existence with anything more than the occasional sigh that could peel bark off a tree. You weren't supposed to be here. Neither of you were. The snowstorm came out of nowhere 1 minute. You were tracking deer. The next, you were ankle-deep in white oblivion, visibility gone. And your only option was this God's forsaken shack with its leaky roof, one bearskin blanket, and exactly 0 exits that don't lead directly into frostbite. The silence is unbearable. You haven't seen her in months. Not since Exile. Not since the whole poetry scandal that painted your name in ink across half the known settlements. You'd expected anger, maybe even theatrical fury. What you didn't expect was indifference, which, frankly, hurts more. You clear your throat. She doesn't look up. You always this quiet? Or is it just me? Nothing. Not even a smirk. You try again. Nice weather we're not having. Still nothing. You want to scream. Instead, you pull out a bit of bark from your satchel, the last of your writing stock, and start scratching a line. You're not writing for her. Of course not. Definitely not. This is purely for personal sanity. Just something about wind, cold, the ache of waiting for a fire to catch while everything else freezes. You don't even glance it at her, but you can feel it when she finally looks. It's subtle, the way her eyes shift, the way the firelight flickers a little brighter when her attention turns to you. Still writing, she finally mutters, voice low and flat. You nod, without looking up. Only way to stay warm. You know that poem you left in my cloak. Your heart skips. Which one? The one about the raven with frostbite. Oh, that one. Not your proudest moment. Written during the low point of Exile, heavy on the melodrama and bird metaphors. It was terrible, she says, but I liked it. Silence again, but softer. Less barbed. You dare a glance. Her face hasn't changed much. Same sharp cheekbones. Same eyes like storm clouds that might be mercy or menace. But her posture's different. Less rigid. Like she's stopped bracing for impact. You pass her the bark, wordlessly. She reads it, smirks, then pulls out her own blade and adds a line beneath yours. It's not a masterpiece. It doesn't have to be. It's shared space now. This little scrap of language in a hut no one else knows about. You end up trading verses through the night. No declarations, no apologies, just phrases, lines, sometimes insults, sometimes memories. The kind of emotional truce that only poets and very bored snowbound enemies can manage. She tells you about her winter, the boring parts. Her cousin got betrothed. Her goat gave birth to a kid that screams like a dying bird. Someone tried to write her a poem using only runes, and it looked more like a threat than a love note. You tell her about the goat shed, about the shell she left, about the raven that dropped your bark reply on your own head. She laughs at that one. Real laughter this time. You feel something in your ribs loosen. The next morning, the storm breaks. A weak, watery sun cuts through the clouds like a god, finally remembering to check the weather. The world is blindingly white. Quiet in that way that makes sound feel like a betrayal. You step outside together. The snow is deep, but passable. The path back to the village is visible in patches, a breadcrumb trail of broken branches and regret. She walks beside you in silence. No touch, no gesture, just presence. It's enough, halfway home. She pauses. So, you're back. You shrug. Technically, still banned from the mead hall, only if I rhyme maiden with forsaken again. She laughs. Softer this time. You really can't help yourself. You grin. I really can't. She pulls a folded scrap from her cloak. Hands it to you. You dropped this. You recognize it immediately. It's your first poem, the one that got you into this mess. You thought it was burned. You kept it. Of course I did, she says. It was awful, but honest. You nod. There's nothing else to say. Not yet. The thaw is slow, but it's happening. Between each step, the world melts a little more. Later, when you return to the village and people stare, you stare back, not defiant, just ready. She walks beside you, not touching, but close enough that the gossip will write its own saga. Historians might never find the poems you wrote in that hunting hut, the verses traded beside the fire, the quiet understanding carved into the silence. But they happened. They mattered. And they lasted longer than the storm. They say there's no time for poetry on the battlefield, but they have clearly never been a Viking pacing behind the shield wall with an axe in one hand and a half-formed sonnet in the other. The morning of the skirmish is cold enough to make your teeth ache. Frost on your beard, stiff joints, and a growing suspicion that you might vomit from anxiety before a single spear is thrown. You're surrounded by warriors muttering prayers to Odin, Thor, or whoever happens to be listening. You, though you're whispering lines, not to the gods, but to memory. To her, you've written a stanza on your shield, carved it with the tip of your dagger. It's not decorative. It's not for show. It's an anchor, something to hold on to if everything else goes sideways. If I fall, it reads, "Remember me not by the blood on my blade, but the lines that once made you laugh when you shouldn't have. You thought it sounded noble when you etched it. Now it just feels desperate." The war band assembles. You're not first in line. Thankfully. More middle-tier fodder. Not exactly inspiring, but survivable. You count the warriors ahead of you and wonder how many of them have hidden verses under their cloaks. Probably more than they'll admit. There's a common belief that Vikings were brute beasts with no use for words. But the sagas tell another story and who could slit a throat and recite 3 rhymed insults before the body hit the floor. Even mid-battle, verse has its place. Skalds would sometimes compose in the moment, building rhythm out of chaos. Lines from the clash of iron. It's distraction, sure, but it's also a legacy. Die well, and someone will sing of you. Die with a line in your mouth. And maybe that line gets remembered longer than your name. The signal horn blows. The charge begins. You run, feet pounding frozen turf, shouting like it'll protect you from spears. You don't think about poetry for the next hour. You think about not dying. That's your whole mental bandwidth. Dodge, swing, duck, yell, repeat. You get a cut on your forearm. Shallow, but flashy. You slip once and nearly eat dirt, but someone yells and pulls you back. You don't even know who. Just a hand, a grunt, and then more chaos. When it's over, the field is a mess of mud, blood, and steam rising from too many bodies. You sit on a rock, breathing hard, eyes wide. You're alive. You're somehow alive. Around you. Survivors laugh. curse, pray, sob. You pull your shield onto your lap and read your verse again. It's smudged with grime and something you hope isn't intestines, but it's still legible. And you realize you weren't the only one who brought poetry into battle. A younger fighter nearby is muttering lines under his breath. Another is sharpening his blade while softly reciting something about waves and wives and warm hands. You look around and understand this isn't just bravado. This is how they cope. Verse is armor you wear on the inside. You get back home bruised, bandaged, and weirdly energized. Your arm will heal. Your shield is toast, but your head is buzzing with half-formed lines about the noise of war and the quiet that follows. She finds you the next day, asleep in the barn, because you're still not technically allowed back in your own house after that sheep incident. She brings bread and doesn't say much. Just sits beside you and hands you a strip of cloth. It's not food, it's a verse, her handwriting. You unfold it carefully, aching in every muscle. It reads, "Your voice reached farther than your blade. That's why you returned. You don't speak for a full minute. Not because you're stunned, though you are, but because you're already composing your reply. You scratch it into the back of a spoon with your fingernail, hand it over, and wait." She reads, smiles, and for the first time in weeks, everything feels still. Historians still debate whether Viking warriors composed actual poetry during combat, or if that's a saga embellishment layered in later for dramatic effect. But enough surviving lines reference the heat of battle, the tension of pre-fight nerves, and the desperate, defiant pride of dying with a rhyme in your throat. You want to believe it's true, because you've lived it now. You've stood in a circle of death with a stupid little love poem scratched into your shield and somehow made it home again. And that means something. That night, you add a new stanza to your collection. It's raw, short, not elegant, but it begins with, "Today I did not die, but I did rhyme." You pin it above your sleeping mat and fall asleep knowing it'll be there in the morning. Another proof, another piece, another reason to keep writing, even if tomorrow you're back in the mud. Because whether it's sung in a feast hall or mumbled through cracked lips on a frozen battlefield, verse endures. And so somehow, the marriage poem begins the way most disasters do, with too much confidence and not enough sleep. You're standing outside her family's longhouse, clutching a bundle of bark scrolls, pretending not to notice the thin layer of ice forming on your eyelashes. You're here to recite, not just any poem, mind you, but the poem. The one that could, if performed properly, convince her family that you're more than just a bard with commitment issues and an unfortunate habit of rhyming spear with fear in romantic contexts. It's custom, you're told. A marriage proposal must come with 3 stanzas. One for the woman, one for her kin, one for the gods. All of them judged. Publicly, loudly, brutally. And if one stanza flops, the deal is off. No pressure. You've rewritten these lines 13 times. At one point, you considered giving up entirely and moving to Greenland. But now you're here, heart pounding like a war drum made of shame, hoping your metaphors land harder than your nerves. The door opens. Her father steps out. He's built like a retired berserker and smells faintly of onions. "You ready?" he grunts. You nod. He gestures. You walk inside. The hall is packed. Not just her family, but neighbors, friends, local gossips. That one guy who owes you fish from 2 summers ago, everyone's here. Someone hands you a horn of mead. You take a sip, then clear your throat. Silence falls. You begin. First stanza her. You go for something honest, but vivid. Her voice, you say, is the thread that ties dusk to dawn. Her laughter is the breath between storms. Her presence, a thaw in the frost of your wandering soul. It's a little much, but the room is quiet. Her mother's eyes soften. Her younger sister tries not to grin. You might be onto something. Second stanza her family. Trickier. You compare their strength to oaks, their judgment to the turning tide, their unity to woven sails that guide a homebound ship. It's poetic. It's respectful. It's just flattering enough to make her uncle stop glaring at you. One stanza left. The gods. You've rewritten this one so many times it's become more of a prayer than a poem. You lift your eyes to the rafters, where smoke curls toward the sky hole. To Odin, you say, I offer my honesty. To Freyja, my longing. To Thor, my promise I will not run, even when the storm comes from within the home. There's a pause. Then, a sound. Not thunder. Laughter. Her father chuckles. Her aunt snorts. Even the judgmental goat in the doorway makes a strange approving grunt. She smiles. Not a small smile. A real one. Like something breaking open. You did it. You think. The elders huddle. Deliberate. You sip your mead and try not to pass out. After what feels like a century, her father rises. We've heard your words, he says. We've weighed your lines. He looks at her. Do you accept this fool? She looks at you, slowly, then nods. I do. Applause. Real applause. Someone claps you on the back so hard you spill your drink. A child throws dried fish in celebration. The goat tries to eat your sleeve. You don't care. You're floating. Later, after the crowd disperses, you find her by the hearth. She's poking at the coals, eyes warm, voice quiet. You practiced that last stanza the most. Didn't you, Es? You admit, the gods are picky. She laughs. Especially Thor. Then she reaches into her sleeve and pulls out a scrap of bark. A verse. Her own. Your words. It reads, are clumsy, but brave. That's enough. You blink. Is this your vow? Your trial poem? You passed. Now, it's my turn. And she recites it. 3 stanzas. One for you, one for your madness, one for the winter you both survived. Her lines are better than yours. Cleaner, sharper, but they end on the same note hope, laced with mischief. Historians still debate the accuracy of Viking marriage rituals involving poetry. Some claim it was theatrical embellishment added by later scribes. Others point to fragmentary records poems exchanged, verses carved into ceremonial tools, wedding songs passed down orally that suggest poetry was very much part of the pact. A promise made not just in presence, but in language. You sleep that night beside the fire, her poem tucked under your tunic like a charm. In the morning, you find a ribbon tied to your doorpost, red. It flutters in the wind like a flame. Someone's painted a line beneath it. 2 skalds wed, may their verses outlast their tempers. You recognize the handwriting. Her brother. Of course, it starts innocently enough. You're sitting at your usual spot by the hearth, gnawing on a chunk of dried lamb and contemplating whether to rhyme winter breath with kitchen death. When your mother strolls in with a look that can only be described as barely concealed superiority, she's holding something behind her back. That's never a good sign. I found this, she says, revealing a bark scroll. You squint. It looks familiar, very familiar. Your verse. But not quite. The structure is cleaner, the meter smoother. The second stanza doesn't stumble over that awkward kenning you struggled with for 2 days. She hands it to you like it's a fish you forgot you caught. You scan it, growing cold. "This is my poem," you say. "Mostly," she replies, grinning like she's just salted the entire earth and enjoyed it. "You left it lying around last winter. I made some edits." You gape. "You edited my love poem. It was clunky." She shrugs. "I fixed the syllables and changed that horrible metaphor about gooseberries and longing. No one longs for gooseberries. I do," you say, though now you're not sure. "Also," she continues, "ignoring your heartbreak, I changed the final line, made it land better. That's the part that got it passed around the village. Your stomach sinks. Wait, the version. People know the one everyone keeps quoting. Mine," she confirms, practically glowing. "You're welcome." You sit there, stunned. She pats your head, utterly smug. "Next time," she says, "show me your drafts before embarrassing the family with an unfinished stanza." You're too mortified to speak. Historians still argue whether poetry in Viking households was a solo pursuit or a shared family affair. Given the oral traditions and communal living conditions, it's likely no poem stayed untouched by other ears. Still, having your mother ghostwrite your love verse is a uniquely humbling form of literary trauma. That afternoon, you go for a long walk to clear your head. Your boots crunch through snow while you mutter to yourself about artistic integrity, stolen credit, and the possibility of fleeing to a monastery just to avoid further humiliation. You stop by the river, where the ice groans like a tired god, and scratch a bitter little verse into a birch tree. My lines once raw, now mother-polished, sharp as gossip, soft as stew. You doubt it'll win any prizes, but it makes you feel better. When you return to the village, people are still quoting your mother's version of the poem. Someone's even painted a line from it above the door to the smokehouse. You try to correct them. Actually, the original stanza had, "Yes, yes," they wave you off. But her version sings. You consider launching a full campaign to reclaim your reputation. A dramatic reading, maybe. A public duel of poems. But deep down, you know the truth her edits worked. It stings, like finding out your battle story was improved in retelling by someone who wasn't even there. But it also makes you wonder how many of your other verses weren't just yours, how many were shaped by overheard phrases, unsolicited advice, or a well-placed smirk from across the room. Later, as you're brooding by the hearth, she returns, this time with a small carved box. "You're going to want to see this," she says, handing it over like a peace offering. Inside, dozens of bark strips, early drafts, forgotten stanzas, scribbles you thought you'd thrown into the fire. "I've kept them," she says. "All of them. Every version. Every line you gave up on. Just in case. You don't know what to say." She leans down, pressing a kiss to your forehead. "You're a poet," she murmurs. "And poets rewrite. They always have help, even when they pretend they don't." That night, you reread every line in the box. You find your old mistakes, your young rhymes, your hopeful, clumsy metaphors, and, yes, her notes in the margins. Tiny corrections, suggestions, sometimes just a single word. And for the first time, you realize this wasn't sabotage. It was legacy. Her way of making sure your words lived longer than the parchment, that your voice didn't get lost in its own rhythm. You write her a new verse, not about love or longing, just about mothers. You call her the hidden quill, the editor of hearts, the quiet voice behind the loudest line. You don't show it to her. Not yet. You tuck it into the box. Maybe one day, someone will find it and realize your most famous poem wasn't entirely yours. And maybe they'll smile. Because even in the most rugged of warrior cultures, poetry was never truly a solo act. It was community, family, collaboration in the quiet moments between chores and storms. And sometimes, the best love poem is the one ghost-written by the person who raised you to write in the first place. If you think modern dating apps are stressful, imagine trying to legally flirt in front of every elder, chieftain, distant cousin, and judgmental goat in a fjord radius. Welcome to the all-thing Viking society's answer to Tinder, court, parliament, open mic night, and farmer's market all rolled into one long, chaotic weekend of arbitration and awkward glances. You arrive at dawn, cloak dusted with road grime, verses packed in your pouch, heart absolutely not ready for this. The Althing stretches across a wide, flat plain, ringed by hills and tents, voices already buzzing with trade negotiations, property disputes, and petty feuds so old even the goats seem bitter. But your mission is simpler, if far more suicidal, to declare poetic interest in front of the very people who once banished you for a misplaced metaphor. You spot her near the rune pole, listening to her aunt lecture a local merchant about cheese prices. She hasn't seen you yet. Good. You need time to rehearse. The plan is to wait for the courtship petitions, a semi-formal portion of the Althing, where eligible suitors may, technically, request a future union using words instead of livestock. If approved, it's not binding, but it's public, witnessed, on record, and deeply embarrassing if done poorly. You've written your verse, 3 lines, short and potent. You've tested them on your neighbor's goat, who blinked twice, which you're taking as a positive sign. The scroll is tucked into your belt. You recite it under your breath like a prayer, again and again, adjusting your cadence with every repetition. Around you, arguments flare. Someone's threatening exile over sheep theft. A child gets dragged away for calling a jarl's wife troll-adjacent. Another skald is doing impressions of Odin. Badly. You're home, in the most horrifying sense. Finally, the petitions begin. One by one, men and women step forward, voices shaking, presenting gifts or reciting awkward verses. Some are laughed off the field, some are applauded. One elderly man gets a cheer so loud you suspect it's for his courage, not his poem, which rhymed blessings with dressing. Then it's your turn. You step forward. The hush that follows is familiar and not comforting. Your name is still tangled with scandal, your reputation barely repaired, but you hold your scroll high. I speak 3 lines, you say, to one who has heard more, and then you read them. They're not flashy. They don't rhyme heart with part, or mention her hair in seasonal metaphors. They're quiet, steady. They end with, not to own, but to walk beside until the frost melts from our footsteps. You lower the scroll, and wait. Her father clears his throat. Her brother smirks. Her great-aunt mutters something about weak verbs. But then she steps forward. Not rushed, not theatrical, just present. She doesn't speak for a moment, just studies your face like you're a puzzle she's finally solved. Then, calmly, She replies, "You once asked me to read between your lines. I did, and I found space." The elders nod. The goat bleats. Someone claps, unsure whether it's appropriate. It's enough. You step back into the crowd. The official scribes etch your names into a slate, a formality that means nothing now but everything later. You're not married. You're not even promised. But your intentions are public, legally logged, socially irreversible. If she walks away now, no one would blame her. But she doesn't. She stands beside you as the crowd returns to its usual chaos. "That last line," she says, quietly. "You rewrote it. I wanted it to be true." You reply, "Not just pretty. It was both." You almost die from relief. Later, as you both walk the edges of the Althing, trading lines from overheard arguments and mocking bad petitions, someone stops you. An older woman, wrapped in sealskin, eyes sharp as flint. "I remember your first poem," she says. "The one about the girl with eyes like something about fish lake trout?" You mutter, ashamed. "Yes, that," she nods. "You've improved." Then she wanders off before you can thank her. Historians often struggle to pinpoint how formal courtship worked in Viking society. Sagas mix ceremony with chaos, and the line between political alliance and personal desire was always blurry. But records of legal recitations, ritual verse exchanges, and public witness statements suggest that even the most personal acts like asking someone to walk beside you required public performance. You've passed that stage now. Technically. But something deeper has shifted. You didn't just declare your feelings. You offered them as record, as law, as story. That night, back at your tent, she slips a new stanza into your sleeping mat. Your silence spoke louder than your verse, but your verse waited. So I listened. You read it 3 times before sleep takes you. The wind howls. The Althing thrums with noise. But in your chest, there's only quiet, the kind that follows a line well received, the kind that means we keep writing. Together. You've had mead before many times. Actually, enough to know your tolerance, to pace yourself, to keep your dignity mostly intact through toasts, boasts, and the occasional off-key drinking song about turnip theft. But tonight is different. Tonight is your betrothal feast, which means the horn never stops refilling. And every uncle, cousin, and suspiciously poetic stranger keeps insisting on toasting the scald, who finally put his words where his heart was. You're flattered. At first, then dizzy, then a little concerned about the volume at which you're reciting your own poetry. Someone asked for your greatest romantic line, and instead of modestly declining, you stood on a bench, raised your cup, and shouted. Her laugh is the lull between wars, which was met with applause. Sure, but also someone yelling. That's not even a real kenning. At some point, you lose your boots. No one steals them. You just forget. They vanish, replaced by socks that appear to be mismatched, and possibly not yours. She finds you somewhere between your 4th and 5th stanza, eyes glassy, shirt untucked, trying to rhyme promise with omnibus, which isn't even a word in your language. She doesn't scold you, not immediately, just stands there, arms crossed, with a half smile that says, "This is what I've chosen." And somehow, I'm okay with that. "You're drunk," she says. You nod, but poetically, you recited your own love poem backwards. That was a performance piece. You insist. Experimental. You called my father a grizzled turnip of respect. You blink. Did it scan? She laughs, and you melt a little. Then she grabs your arm and hauls you away from the crowd, through the torchlight, past the goat pen, and toward the quiet side of the village where the stars breathe heavier, and no one is singing about onions anymore. You sit on a low stone wall, breath fogging in the night. Your head spins gently, like a lazy wheel. She watches you with the calm amusement of someone very used to your nonsense. Do you even remember what you said to the elders? She asks. You try to recall. Something about love being a frost that warms you from the outside in. You compared my aunt to a walrus. That was a metaphor. No, you just called her a walrus. You groan. She leans back, face tilted to the sky. You also promised me 3 poems a season for the rest of our lives. You blink. That sounds ambitious. It does. She agrees. And binding. Legally. If I can find 2 witnesses and a bark scroll. You're joking. Try me. You chuckle. Then sober. I meant it. Though. She looks at you. The poem's all of it. I meant every stupid line. Even the ones I butchered. Especially those. She nods. I know. And then, after a pause, you remember the first poem you gave me? You wince. The one about raven hair and something about fire goats, she says. Absolutely terrible, but I still have it. You stare. Why? Because it was honest? Messy, but real. You weren't trying to impress anyone, just to say something you didn't know how to say out loud. You're quiet for a while. The stars keep burning. Somewhere nearby, someone drops a tankard and starts yelling at a tree. So, you ask softly, if I write another one tonight badly, will you keep that one too, she thinks. Then shrugs. Depends how bad. Challenge accepted. You pull a scrap of cloth from your belt, because of course you've stuffed emergency writing material into your formal tunic, and scratch a line with a soot-covered nail. It's clumsy, slurred, overwrought, but it ends with, if this verse stumbles, it's because it's running toward you. You hand it over. She reads it, once, then folds it carefully and tucks it into her sleeve. That's 2 tonight, she says. 1 more, and the vow's fulfilled. You're really keeping count. Of course. I'm marrying a poet, not a fisherman. I expect words, not just dinner. You grin. She smiles back. The kind of smile that doesn't need poetry to explain it, but deserves poetry anyway. Historians may never find record of this night. They'll uncover shards of feasts, fragments of vows, maybe even a bark scroll with a verse about turnips if you're unlucky. But they won't know how your hand found hers when no one else was looking, how the stars hummed with approval, how the goat yes, that one wandered by and snorted like it was officiating the moment. You stand, a little unsteady. She catches your elbow. Let's get you to bed, she says, before you start reciting to the livestock. Too late, you whisper. I already wrote a haiku about the ox. We don't have haikus? Then I invented one. I'm a pioneer. She laughs again, and it echoes through the dark like the best kind of rhyme. You never imagined a love triangle would involve more poetry than weapons. But here you are, stuck between another skald with better hair and your own crippling inability to keep metaphors to yourself. His name is Ulfric, which already feels unfair. What kind of romantic rival has a name that sounds like a thunderclap wearing fur? He arrived last week, swaggering into the village with a harp on his back and a grin that suggested he's never once doubted the appeal of his cheekbones. He's not from here. He's visiting, which is Viking for, I want to see if my verse gets me a bed or a beating. The worst part is he's good. His poems are smooth, his rhymes almost too perfect, and he's mastered the kind of dramatic pauses that make the whole hall lean forward like a field of drunken stalks. You hear his first stanza before you even see him. He's performing by the central fire, surrounded by wide-eyed listeners, weaving a tale of lost warriors and the kiss of fate. And guess who's listening in the front row? Tubarsis. Of course she is. Not swooning exactly, but attentive, curious, smiling a little too wide at his third stanza, which includes a suspiciously familiar kenning about the whale road of longing. You invented that, or at least you think you did. Either way, it stings. You lurk near the back, trying not to look like you're plotting a duel while crafting a counterpoem in your head. Because that's how it works now, not blades, not fists, but words. Scalds spar with stanzas. And in this village, every performance is a battlefield. The next day, you pretend not to care. You go about your chores, muttering bitter couplets to the goats, polishing your writing tools like they're weapons, and absolutely not composing a 10-line rebuttal in hexameter about poetic plagiarism and the integrity of romantic metaphor. She finds you by the woodpile. He's interesting, she says. You nod. So are avalanches. Jealousy doesn't suit you. I'm not jealous. You lie. I'm just invested in the accuracy of local poetic lineage. She laughs. You could just write something better. I already have. Then share it. And just like that, you're back in the ring. That night, you stand up before the same crowd. Your heart a drum, your palms damp. You begin slow. No theatrics, just your voice, steady and low. You speak of moments not performed, silent glances, shared chores, the kind of love that doesn't need applause to be real. Your verse doesn't dazzle, it roots. When you finish, the hall is quiet. No cheers, just a beat of silence. Then someone claps. Then another. Even Ulfric, the smug rune thief, nods once, tight-lipped. Later, she finds you beneath the stars. That was good, she says. Just good. Better than his. High praise. I didn't say much. Better. You groan. She grins, but her eyes are soft. You know what I liked most? She asks. Line 6, about the warmth that lingers even after the fire dies. You blink. I almost cut that line. Don't. She leans closer. That's the one that stayed. Historians argue whether skaldic rivalries ever turned romantic disputes into public literary duels. Some sagas suggest yes, rival poets clashing not just for glory, but affection, using verses to wound, woo, or win favor. The outcomes vary. Some got exiled, others got married. A few got accidentally stabbed with styluses, but all of them wrote, because even in jealousy, the need to be heard, to be chosen, burns louder than pride. The next morning, Ulfric approaches you. Your line, he says, about fire and warmth. That was clean. You nod. Thanks. Your echoed helm of grief was elegant, if a little dramatic. Love makes dramatists of us all, he says, then adds, but I'm leaving soon. You pause. Oh, there's a woman in another village. Likes riddles. I think she might be into fish metaphors. You laugh, a little too hard. Then you've found your audience. He smiles and leaves. No bitterness, just a nod. A poet's handshake. That night, you and she sit by the fire, trading lines again. Not verses of war or claim, just shared words, quiet rhymes, comfort. She looks at you, and there's nothing performative about it. No audience, no rivals, just the one person who saw your simplest line and called it home. She appears out of the mist like a half-formed story wild hair, seaweed in her braid, eyes that look like they've seen every shipwreck and judged every single one. You meet her while fishing. Well, while pretending to fish. You're actually writing a poem about the way cold air makes memory feel sharper when she startles you by appearing on the opposite bank of the stream, barefoot, staring like you've just recited bad verse aloud. She doesn't speak, just tilts her head. Curious. You blink. She's still there. Do you need help? You ask. Or a coat? She laughs, but it's not unkind. Do I look cold? You glance down at her bare ankles, her exposed collarbone, the fact that she's standing in melting snow like it's a warm rug. Yes. Then look again. You do? You blink. She doesn't shiver, not even a little. You're not sure how long you stand there, halfway between curiosity and worry. But by the time you remember to introduce yourself, she's already turned and disappeared into the trees. That night, you try to write about her. The lines are strange, stilted. Your metaphors feel heavy. Nothing fits. You try again. You describe her voice as the hush after the axe falls, and her gaze as smoke rising from wet stone. Too dramatic, but you can't stop. You see her again the next day. She's closer this time, sitting on a fallen log, carving something into bark with a fishbone. She looks up. You write poems. She says, not a question, a fact. You nod. Sometimes. I don't. She replies, but I steal them. You don't know what that means. She tosses a strip of birch bark at your feet. It's your line, one you left behind last winter, scribbled on a failed scroll and discarded near the old fire pit. How did you words travel? She shrugs. Even the bad ones. You laugh. More uneasy than amused. You live nearby, nowhere near enough. Again. No explanation. She's gone by the time you form a better question. You start seeing her more often. Never at your home. Always near water. Always when you're alone. She's like a ghost that eats riddles and quotes your own poems back to you in a voice that makes them sound better than they are. She tells you stories, strange ones, about fish that sing and stones that remember. She asks questions you can't answer. Would you still write if no one read? How many metaphors before they lose meaning? Have you ever written something that made someone leave? One day she shows up with a song. She hums it softly, tunelessly, then says, "You wrote this." You frown. "I've never written music. Not with notes," she says. "But the rhythm was yours. I turned it into something that floats." You try to follow her logic. You fail. But something about her feels older than your village and younger than your fear. One evening, she appears just as you've finished composing a new stanza about longing wrapped in silence. She reads it, looks at you. Who is it for? You pause. Someone real. Then don't waste it on paper. You stare. What should I do? She steps close. Say it. Say it when it matters. Say it before you think you're ready. Say it while your hands are still shaking. You swallow. Why? Because even water forgets what it once reflected. Then she's gone. Again. Days pass. You don't see her. You start to wonder if she was ever real. If she was a trick of the light. A fever dream soaked in old metaphors. Then a child mentions seeing the river woman humming again near the rocks. You sprint there. She's not there. But something is. A stone. Flat. Smooth. Carved with one line. Your words reach farther than your feet. You sit. You cry a little. You carve your own reply into the other side of the stone. I'll walk farther, then. Historians rarely write about these women. The ones who show up in side tales. The strange, witchy figures who never marry, never settle, but shape stories anyway. Maybe she was a troll wife, maybe a spirit, maybe just a very feral woman with great instincts and no patience for your romantic dithering. But she changed your writing, permanently. You begin to compose differently, less polish, more pulse. You write not for the applause, but for the person who once said, "Don't waste it on paper." You see your love again the next week. The real one. The one who waited. You give her your newest poem. Shorter than usual. No grand metaphors. Just 5 lines, and the memory of someone else's advice echoing in your head. She reads it, looks at you, and says, "Finally." You don't ask what she means. You just take her hand and whisper the last line aloud, the way you should have done from the start, because she's real, and she's still here. And not even the river forgets that. You never expected to sing lullabies. Certainly not with your calloused hands clumsily rocking a cradle made from driftwood and regret. Trying to remember if the 4th line of that old cradle song rhymes with blessing or blessing's echo. You're not built for this. You've faced exile, verse duels, and that time you accidentally flirted with a widow who turned out to be your second cousin. But this tiny, squirming, red-faced, being wrapped in wool and uncertainty. This is the most terrifying stanza you've ever been handed. It cries like a war horn and eats like it's preparing for winter, even in spring. But when it finally sleeps, eyelids twitching like it's dreaming of clouds or milk or chaos, your voice drops without thinking into the old rhythm. The tune isn't yours. It's one your father sang, or maybe your mother, maybe both. You never cared enough to ask when you were younger, and now the memories faded around the edges like old bark left too long in the sun. But the words, the bones of the song remain. You sing them low, tuneless but steady, like a skald learning how to whisper. Sleep, my flame. The world's still wide, and morning waits beyond the tide. It doesn't rhyme perfectly. It doesn't have to. She watches from the doorway, arms crossed, trying not to smile. "I didn't think you'd sing," she murmurs. "Didn't think I knew how." You reply, "That's obvious." She smirks. "But it's not terrible. High praise." You nod solemnly, as if that's all you ever wanted. You don't tell her that the first lullaby you tried was actually a thinly disguised metaphor for loneliness, and the baby immediately threw up on you halfway through. You're learning. Slowly. Through error. Through rhythm. Through repetition. Lullabies, it turns out, are not so different from love poems. They're small, repetitive, full of longing and soft desperation. A prayer wrapped in melody, a promise in miniature. You start composing your own. Simple ones. No kennings. No alliteration, just raw lines. Soft enough not to wake the child. Firm enough to stay in your throat. Your breath is warmer than snowmelt. Your fists clench like warriors in sleep. You carve a verse into the side of the cradle. Not for fame, not for legacy. Just so that one day, someone will know a skald sang here. Even in this stillness. Even in this mess. You find yourself remembering old battle hymns and recasting them as lullabies. A verse once used to prepare men for death, now softened to soothe someone who doesn't even know what a sword is. Storm waits beyond, but you are the calm. You hum. The hearth that held when others fled. It works. Sometimes. Other times, the baby screams so loudly you fear the goats might revolt. But the verses keep coming. Not because they're good, but because they're needed. She joins in one night. You're both exhausted. Faces drawn like forgotten scrolls. When she hums a line you've never heard before. Sleep. Storm breath. Sleep. Your name is not yet known, but the world waits to echo it. You turn. Yours. My grandmother's, she says. Or maybe she stole it. Either way, it's yours now, too. You write it down the next day, careful not to smudge the ink. Historians don't often speak of Viking lullabies. They chase the sagas, the battles, the high drama of love and loss. But the quiet moments rarely make it into the manuscripts. Still, fragments exist, half verses, soft rhymes about warmth and wolves and the hope of return. You wonder how many were passed down not by firelight, but by desperate parents praying for an hour of sleep. One night, while the village sleeps and the baby finally doesn't cry, you sit beside the cradle and write the simplest poem you've ever made. It has no cleverness, no flourish, just this. You opened your eyes, and the world hushed. I spoke your name, and I knew silence would never sound the same again. You don't perform it. You don't share it. You just whisper it when the baby stirs and the wolves howl far away. You think maybe this is the real poetry. Not the verse battles or the grand declarations. Not even the love poems etched in bark and smuggled past angry fathers. It's here in the sleepless nights and sagging eyelids, in the half-sung promises and the quiet fear of being someone's first home. You don't need applause. You don't need an audience. You just need the verse to work just once more to keep the baby asleep for a few more breaths. And when she reaches out in her sleep, tiny fingers curling around yours like she's anchoring herself to the world, you stop writing entirely. You just sit there, holding on. There's a moment in the deep dark of winter when the air inside the longhouse feels heavier than outside. Despite the fire, smoke clings to everything: your clothes, your hair, your poems. You're alone, the village asleep or pretending to be, and you're hunched over a slab of driftwood, writing by candlelight that's more smoke than flame. This is your 6th draft. The first 5 lie crumpled under your stool, one stained with fish oil from your dinner, one half burned after an enthusiastic elbow knocked the lamp. None of them worked. They were too sweet, too formal, too focused on structure and not on feeling. You mutter to yourself as you scratch out another line, her voice like frost on a morning blade. No, that sounds like you're terrified of her, which maybe you are, but not in that way. Her silence echoes louder than horns. Better, but tired. You sigh, dip the stylus again, and try to clear your mind. You used to write in the mead hall, showing off, letting verses roll out like weapons fast, sharp, performative. Now your poetry has to sneak. Between chores, between cries, between long silences that stretch through the dark while she holds the baby and you sit beside them, overwhelmed by the fact that they're still here, still yours. You haven't written anything worth keeping in weeks, maybe months, not since the thaw, not since everything became real in the unpoetic way. Laundry, firewood, neighbor disputes over chickens. But tonight, something stirs. The words come slower, more deliberate. She speaks less now, but every word is a stone skipped across still water, still echoing. You pause. That might actually work. You don't smile. Not yet. You keep going. I watch her sleep, and the lines rewrite themselves softer, simpler, more true. You forget the cold, forget your backaches, forget the goat you still owe your cousin. This is writing again, not for performance, not for courtship, but to hold something still, to make one clear sound inside a house that's all noise and routine. Behind you, you hear her stir, just a rustle of furs. Maybe she's dreaming. Maybe she's awake and listening. You keep writing. You mention the way she bites her lip when thinking, the crease between her brows when the child cries, how she says your name like she's smoothing down a flame. No metaphors, no kennings, just the truth. You hate how hard that is. Historians rarely get these poems. These aren't the verses carved into memorial stones or recited at feasts. These are the quiet stanzas no one saves written late at night, read once, maybe twice, then tucked into the bottom of a chest or used to light a lantern when oil runs low. But they're the ones that tell the truth, not about glory or conquest or even love in the grand sense, just about being, staying, bearing witness. You start the last line, then stop. You realize what's missing, her voice. So you get up carefully, so as not to wake the house and pad across the cold floor to her side. She's awake, watching. She doesn't ask what you've written. She just shifts, makes room, and you lie down beside her, your breath warming the shared air between you. You whisper the lines, not loudly, not dramatically, just close. Close enough that they land like breaths, not declarations. She doesn't speak, just pulls your hand to her chest, where you feel the slow rhythm beneath her ribs. You think, that's the cadence I've been missing. In the morning, she's already up before you, bundling the child, humming something low and strange. You rise, stiff, clutching your poem. It's imperfect, but real. She notices you holding it. Another, a better one. We'll see, she teases, but she sets the kettle and waits. And that's more than enough. You post the poem on the doorframe, not for the world, just for her, and maybe for the wind, which tends to steal things it likes. That evening, she leaves her own line under your cup. Just 5 words. You still make words hum. You grin so hard it hurts your cheeks, not because of praise, but because after all this, after poems and storms and spilled stew, and that time you accidentally rhymed passion with ration in front of the entire family, you're still writing for someone who listens, someone who answers, someone whose silence makes your verse better, just by being there. Later that week, a neighbor asks if you're still composing. Yes, you say, at night. Feast's coming soon, he says. You going to perform, you think? Maybe. Got anything new, you nod? But it's not for them. Ah, he smirks. A woman poem. A staying poem. You correct. Different beast. That night, you write again. Not on bark, on cloth. You sew the lines into the hem of her shawl while she sleeps. They're crooked, uneven, some nearly invisible. But they're there. She'll find them. And maybe, someday, someone else will. And wonder who you were, and what kind of man writes tiny stanzas into the things people wear when they're too busy for verse. A man who stayed, a skald with stiff fingers and too many unfinished drafts. A father, a husband, a poet in the quiet, making edits while the world rests. Some people smuggle silver, others smuggle sheep, spices, or the occasional extremely illegal cheese. You smuggle love poems, not for profit, not for glory, just to get the words where they need to be past watchful eyes, narrow minds, and jealous husbands who wouldn't know a decent kenning if it bit them in the ankle. It starts simple. A request from a friend, a widower with a stubborn crush on the baker's daughter-sweet girl, can lift a flour sack with one arm and your spirits with the other. He's tongue-tied, always sweaty when she's around. So he comes to you with 3 lines and a loaf of very dry bread as payment. Make it rhyme, he begs, but not too well. She'll know it's not mine. You write it anyway. Something light, clever, about warm ovens and warmer hearts. You tuck it into the lining of a cloak, hand it off under the guise of a trade. 2 weeks later, they're holding hands at the fish market, and he's pretending he's never even heard of you. You don't mind. Then someone else asks. Then another. Soon, you're delivering love lines like contraband, hidden in bundles of herbs, slipped inside sheaths, stitched into the seams of aprons. You use ink made from walnut husks and charcoal. Your scripts shift every time. Messy on purpose. No signature. No trail. Some are anonymous. Some are from names you'd rather not repeat. A married man to a widow. A smith to a trader's apprentice. Once. Even a verse from a young woman to another woman tucked under a flatbread and never spoken of again. But later you see the 2 of them building a fire together at the edge of the village, and it's the best thing you've written all month. Not all of them work. Some verses vanish. Some get torn up. One gets intercepted, and you end up with a black eye and a new respect for butchers with sharp elbows. But most land, quietly, like pebbles tossed into still water. You never ask for much. A meal, a thank you, sometimes just the satisfaction of knowing someone got to say what they couldn't say aloud. It's not about pride. It's about passage. You're a ferry of feelings, a postman of passion, a low-rent muse for hire in a world where honesty is more dangerous than a sword. She finds out. Of course. She always does. One night, as you're carefully carving a stanza into the base of a firewood log, she walks in and says, "So, you're writing for other people now." You freeze. Sometimes. Do they pay you in chickens or gossip? Depends on how ugly the metaphor is. She crosses her arms. What if I asked for one? A chicken. A poem. One not signed. One just delivered. You stare. From someone, to someone. You know I'd recognize your handwriting. Then I'll smudge it. You nod slowly. Okay. What should it say, she thinks. Then whispers a line so simple it makes your throat ache. Even in silence. I kept the rhythm of you. You write it. Later, she pretends she found it in her boots, reads it aloud like she's surprised. Doesn't look at you. You don't push it. Some performances aren't for applause. Some are for preservation. You start archiving the rejects, the lost poems, the ones never delivered or returned unread. You tuck them in the lining of your coat, stitch them into pillows. Once, you bury one under the roots of the oldest tree in the village, a confession too sharp to be spoken, but too true to destroy. Historians love to talk about Viking runestones and sagas, but what they rarely mention are the hidden verses, the ones etched into furniture, scratched into bowls, whispered into snowdrifts and forgotten. These weren't for public record. These were survival, resistance, the act of saying I feel, even if I shouldn't. I remember, even if I mustn't. I love, even if it's not allowed. You begin to teach the younger ones how to hide poems. Not just write them, but fold them, conceal them, wrap them in layers of plausible deniability. You teach the baker's nephew how to carve love into a spoon handle. The shepherd girl, how to knot it into wool. You become a quiet legend, a ghost writer of the heart. They start calling you the cloak poet. You don't correct them. She watches all this with a strange expression, equal parts pride and worry. One night she says, "You're going to get caught." "Probably. Why do you do it?" You pause, because words want to travel, and if they lead back to you, then I'll rhyme my way out of it. She doesn't laugh, just reaches for your hand and says, "Don't rhyme on our gravestone, only if it scans." You smile, but later that night, you write a line and sew it into the hem of her sleeve. No one else will see it, but she will. It says when they find me, let them know I wrote for you first. Death comes quietly, not with fanfare, not with screaming ravens or a thunderclap from the gods, but with the slowing of breath, a fading pulse, the way the air seems to lean in, listening. You're old now, your beard more frost than fire, your hands no longer steady enough to carve words into bark. Though you still try, the longhouse feels bigger than it used to, quieter. Most of the noise has gone children grown, battles fought, stories told. What's left is you, and a fire that hisses like it remembers every secret you ever whispered into its glow. They know you're fading. She knows too. She's by your side more often now, not hovering, not coddling, just present. Like always. Like your favorite verse. You spend your final days going through old scraps, half-finished poems, rejected metaphors, one entire stanza about the curve of her left eyebrow that she insisted was trying too hard. You read it now and still agree, but you keep it. It matters. She brings you a bundle one evening worn cloth, brittle with age. I found these in the box. She says, you recognize the lines instantly. Your very first verses. The awkward ones. The hopeful ones. The ones you never read aloud. She's kept them all. Why, you ask? Voice more wind than thunder. Because, she says, even when they were terrible, they were always true. You laugh. It rattles your ribs. But it's worth it. You write one more. Slowly. One line a day. Your hand shakes. Ink blots. You ruin 3 pieces of bark before she just hands you cloth instead. Softer, she says. More forgiving. The final verse is simple. 6 lines. Each word chosen like it's the last. You don't sign it. You don't need to. That night, You sleep with the poem under your pillow. You don't wake. She finds it in the morning, reads it once, then again, then folds it into her sleeve. Later, she pins it to the doorframe, just above the hearth, just beneath the beam where your first poem once hung. The villagers gather. They ask for a final reading. She obliges. Her voice is even. No quiver, just clarity. She ends the verse, and no one speaks for a long time. They build your pyre with care, wrap your cloak around you, slip your writing stylus into your hand. She places one scrap of bark beside your chest, the one you ruined, blotched with ink and smeared syllables. You were trying to write beloved, but ended up spelling beehive. She kept it anyway. It made me laugh. She says, when someone asks, he was always more beekeeper than berserker. They light the pyre as the sun sets. The smoke carries upward. The wind shifts. Somewhere in the crowd, a child hums a line from one of your lullabies. They don't even realize it's yours. That's the point. The words live on. A skald is never really gone if their verses are still wandering the mouths of others. Historians might one day find fragments of your work, a line scratched into a beam, a metaphor etched into a bowl, a cloth hemmed with names no one remembers. They'll debate who you were, what you meant, whether your love poems were political, personal, or just prolific nonsense. But they'll know one thing for certain. Someone wrote through every storm. Someone carved warmth into a world made of ice. Someone loved and didn't stop writing about it. Not when it hurt. Not when it was inconvenient. Not even when it was dangerous. And that's enough. She stands by the ashes as the last flame dies. Her eyes sting from smoke, or maybe from memory. In her palm is a new line, her own. She whispers it to the wind, then lets it go. And now, as the embers fade and the longhouse settles into its slow breath of night, you can rest. The wind has quieted outside. The goats, even the noisy one, have curled into their corners. The smoke drifts in soft ribbons, curling like old songs, carrying with it the rhythm of verses once whispered beneath snow-heavy skies. Somewhere far off, the sea still moves. The stars hang like candlelight strung across the void, unblinking, unchanged. And though your boots are empty now, and your stylus is cooled for good, the stories remain. Each syllable you carved, each line you stitched, each confession you buried under bark or tucked into someone's sleeve, they all hum. Still breathing, still warm. You gave the cold world rhythm. You gave the loud world silence. You gave the harsh world softness. And in return, it let you stay, longer than most, more deeply than many. The fire pops once. The last log sighs into ash. And the wind gentler now rustles a scrap of cloth that bears your final words. Let it stay there. Let it catch the morning light when it returns. Because morning always returns, even after the longest night, even after the saddest goodbye. Sleep now. Skald. No more verses to finish. No more metaphors to polish. Just the hum of the world you helped shape with a stylus, a smile, and a heartbeat that kept time like Notre Dame ever could. End of script. Sweet dreams.